Do pews, stained glass, crosses make a sanctuary sacred? The answer seems obvious. No, not really. But it points to a deeper question, doesn't it? Is this room sacred? And if it is, what exactly makes it sacred? We design our worship spaces, fill them with symbols and words, put in special furniture, design them with the utmost artistry and craftsmanship, all to inspire us to worship. But whether you worship in a grand and majestic basilica or in a simple country church, our worship places point to an important truth about God. God wants to share life with us here and now on the earth. The Old Testament has story after story after story of times when God would meet a person at an altar or on top of a sacred mountain. After Israel is freed from its slavery in Egypt, one of the very first things God does is to design a worship space, a tabernacle. This tabernacle it's just a tent that would become God's home. God intended to travel with Israel. God intended to live right in the midst of Israel. And he did so for hundreds and hundreds of years. Later, on a sacred mountain in Jerusalem, King Jerusalem would replace that tabernacle with a permanent temple. Again, a home for God. Both the tabernacle and the temple were truly God's home, here on earth at least. But even though God had moved into the neighborhood, even though God was a neighbor, our hearts were still far from God. Both the tabernacle and the temple were very real, but still temporary solutions. And then Jesus came. The Gospel of John tells us that the Word, Jesus, was made flesh and made his dwelling among us. That word dwelling is literally tabernacled. Jesus tabernacled among us. And he spoke and acted as if he were the place of God's presence. He healed the unclean. He cast out demons. He even forgave sins. Jesus acted as if he was the temple of God. And when Jesus was crucified, the veil in the temple, that veil that had put a barrier, keeping humans at a safe distance from God, that veil was torn in two. And not long after, God poured out his Spirit upon everyone, the old and the young, the men and the women, the Jews and the non-Jews. Not long after, Paul will write these revolutionary words. Don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? What makes a sanctuary sacred? It's not the symbols or the design or the furniture or even the fact that it's set apart for worship. What makes spaces sacred are the people in them. Don't you know that God's Spirit dwells in you, wherever you happen to be?